Hello everyone, my name is Karen Stagnitti and I'm presenting Neurodiversity-affirming practice within Learn to Play therapy. Neurodiversity-affirming practice grew out of the neurodiversity movement, and this presentation I'd like to take you through what Learn to Play therapy is informed by and how it is neuro-affirming. So there are three things that influence theoretically and practically Learn to Play therapy. One is Virginia Axeline's child-centered approach. The second one is Vygotsky, especially his zone of proximal development, where another person can support a child's potential development, and the neurobiological research in brain development, which is becoming more and more. So the brain is experience dependent. So that means our therapy should be of high quality, and there is a hierarchical structure to the brain and its function. And first and foremost, a child needs to feel safe before anything else. And that's also informed by polyvagal theory. So just a little bit of depth looking at Learn to Play therapy is child-centered and the influence of Virginia Axeline. So the principles adapted to Learn to Play therapy are the therapist develops a warm, friendly relationship and the child feels safe. There is unconditional positive regard. So the therapist accepts the child and the caregiver for who they are, as they are, respects them and sees them as capable. Very important. The therapist recognises their feelings and adjusts to create a sense of safety, particularly for anxious children and caregivers. The therapist maintains a deep respect for the child's capabilities and recognises that the creation of possible play opportunities for the child, but in a very responsive way. You also create a feeling of permissiveness within the session so that the child feels comfortable to change the play, stop the play, join the play. This is building autonomy. Also, the sessions are not hurried. It is matched to the pace of the child, and the therapist is genuine and authentically really loves engaging in play with the child. So play assessment is usually the beginning of Learn to Play therapy because we need to understand the child's strengths in their play and what they can do in their play. This is informed by a play assessment, and all the play assessments are child-led. So the pretend play enjoyment developmental checklist, the child-initiated pretend play assessment, and the animated movie test are all child-led, where the therapist is passive and supportive and interested in how the child engages in play. The pretend play enjoyment developmental checklist and the chipper both have sections where you can model a play action if you can. Sometimes it's not appropriate, but the modelling of play actions is also to see what other capabilities the child may have. Now, a play assessment also informs what modifications you need to make to the environment. For example, you may need to reduce the number of play materials, or maybe you increase them. It tells you whether you need a lot or few play assessments, what sort of play assessments, and the type of play activities to co-regulate with the child. So in a Learn to Play therapy session, you may need some pretend play activities, but you also may need some sensory motor activities or just pure fun activities that the child enjoys. You also do activities that capture or reflect the child's interests and the spontaneous playability and considerations of the emotional content in the play as the child's capacity builds. You also need to work out, does the child want to include their own toys? I've had some children who bought their own little vehicles because they wanted to play with them, and that was fine. And meeting the caregiver and child and also finding their goals. So in a Learn to Play, you have the zone of proximal development, which is this deep black line, and that's you holding the child in the play, and that's you enhanced within your therapeutic presence and your sense of self, and also creating safety for the child. So you create safety, which is informed by polyvagal theory about vocal tone and prosody. You're calm, you're playing with and beside, you're aware of your physical distance from the child, you are tracking and using empathic reflection, you're smiling with your eyes and your mouth. Your knowledge of pretend play informs where you take the session and how you respond to the child to support their capacity in play. You understand the toys and play materials that you have. You are calm, and there's techniques such as modelling and repetition with variation, for example, that you can use to maintain the child's engagement. Now, all this is to increase the emotional enjoyment and engagement within the child's window of tolerance. And that's that green line that surrounds the child who's seen as capable, respected, and accepted. And the child and also the caregiver is the centre of everything that you do, and you're responding constantly to them. So, neurodiversity-affirming learn to play therapy. So we have on the left neuro-affirming practice and the key components, and this is informed by Raylene Dundon's new book and also Leadbitter's article from 2021. And on the right, we have learn to play therapy. So one of the neurodiversity-affirming practice components is presuming competence of the caregiver and child. And in learn to play therapy, we have unconditional positive regard, where we are accepting, respecting, and see as capable the child and the caregiver. So the child can engage in more complex, meaningful play for them, and that the caregiver is capable of supporting and enjoying their child. You're also promoting autonomy, which is the next neurodiversity-affirming practice component. And the aim for learn to play therapy is that the child takes over. The child chooses, self-initiates, and you become redundant ultimately, because the child is able to play and choose what to play and when to play. And you also increase that autonomy by that permissiveness that you set up, where the child feels very comfortable to come in and change the play. The next neuro-affirming practice is respecting all styles of communication. So in learn to play therapy, you might be verbal, you might be non-verbal. Some people use AAC depending on what the child needs. The actions that you're observing and responding to for the child indicate that the child maybe no longer wants to play that activity, maybe wants to change, or maybe they're tired and they need to finish. For some children, the first learn to play therapy sessions, I've had children that only go for 20 minutes because they're really quite tired at the end of that. So it's really responding to the child. The next neurodiversity-affirming practice component is a strength-based approach. So in learn to play therapy, we know that every child has play skills. So what abilities do they have? Because that is where you start and where you respond to the child. And you tailor to individual needs, and therapy is individual for that child and their parent or caregiver. Neurodiversity-affirming practice is also informed by neurodivergent voices, and there are quite a few books now written by autistic adults. And in learn to play therapy, it's acknowledging that neurodiversity is part of who that child is. So it's providing a safe space, it's accommodating their needs, it's accepting who they are. You're looking at environmental modifications, for example, not overwhelming the child with too many toys. You're going at the pace that the child needs to go at. The length of the session is paced for the child. You're recognising that the child may need to stim, pace the floor, change the workspace. I've had a lot of children who just need to pace the floor, so all of a sudden they'll just go, you know, after they've concentrated for a bit, they'll just go for a walk around the room or stare into space, or had one child who would go through all the joints in his arm. So whatever that child needs to do at that time in the session, that is part of who they are. Sometimes you may need to quietly observe or co-play, or I've had the parent and I just play while the child watches the parent and I playing. The other neurodiversity-affirming practice is honouring neurodivergent culture, and this is within moment-by-moment responsiveness to the caregiver and child and what they need. So there are some misconceptions around play, and some of them around learn to play therapy. So on the left, you have misconceptions, and in the green, you have actually the correction. So we have on the left, play activities are used behaviourally, they're task-driven, they're used as reward, they're skills to be achieved. This is not learn to play. Learn to play is not based in behavioural work or approach, because that means masking, it means burnout. So in learn to play, you're using your therapeutic use of self, you're creating safety, and you're building with that child's intentional, meaningful, enjoyable engagement in play activities at the child's own pace. It's a very different way to work. Another misconception is rigid adherence to development of pretend play, ticking the box. That is too rigid. That is not how it works. And we know that neurodiverse children have play skills, you know, in all sorts of different areas. They have some strengths, they have others. that they're not interested in. So it's not about rigidity. It's about understanding that child's play. It's about increasing complexity and intentional, meaningful play for the child, creating an environment where that child takes over. Rules are used rigidly, and that gives you a sense, if there's rigid rules, then you're not accepted and you may not feel safe. But learn to play is moment-by-moment response. If you need to finish a session early, you do so. If you've prepared 5 activities for a session and you only do 3, that's fine. There are sessions that you think, you might do these play activities. The child comes in and goes, I want to play this. So you go with the child. It's that moment-by-moment responding because you want that child to build their own autonomous play. And then the last one on this page is I've seen blogs about, there's a right way to play. No, right way to play means I'm not accepted and I'm not good enough. I'm not doing it right. There is no way that is a right way to play. It is play, for heaven's sakes. Play is creative and spontaneous, and children use play materials and toys in a way that you may never have thought of. So there is no right way to play. It's how that child engages meaningfully with the play materials and the play in their environment. And the last misconception is pretend play is not relevant. It's either too difficult or its importance is pushed to the forefront of other types of play. So in Learn to Play, there's 2 main points here. One is not all neurodivergent children would benefit from Learn to Play therapy. To benefit, children need to have at least one meaningful word, gesture, or communication, an ability to have some focused attention, even if it's for a few seconds. It has to be individual and what the needs and goals are for that child's quality of life. There are some children where pretend play will never be relevant for them, but engaging in their environment at their level of play will be relevant. The second point is for other neurodivergent children, you assume competence to enjoy pretend play. As pretend play develops, it overlaps with sensory motor play. So there are some children where you're going from pretend play activities to sensory motor throughout a session to co-regulate with them. Other children, you're doing pretend play the whole time because their competence is quite complex in their play. Exploratory play is also very important to play in pretend play. So allowing time for that child to explore a new toy or a play material and work out what it does. And I say, why not? Why should neurodiverse children miss out on the joy of pretend play? Because it brings so many other benefits to children. We know it is a context where children's language develops. It's where their social awareness increases. It's where they can co-regulate and learn to self-regulate. Children love it. They express joy and happiness coming in, and caregivers have often commented that they've had friends come over and play and their child was smiling and enjoying interacting with a peer or a relative they really like. So that's an increase in quality of life. So to finish, I'd like to say that this from the Autistic Self Advocacy Network, in one of their publications, they had an autistic child who does well or appears more visibly engaged isn't becoming less autistic. They're simply showing what they are capable of with the right support. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. And increasing in play complexity ability sits alongside a child's deep interests, whether they are flags of every country or trains or fungi, whatever, that interest still stays there. They are being them, and children have more tools to express who they really are. So thank you very much for listening to this. There are some of the references that inform the background.